Hey, what's up, everybody? Hold on. So it's 7 a.m. here. Everybody else is asleep. We got some Mickey Mouse on in the background. Perfect time for tutorial. I'm gonna go make some coffee, set everything up, then we'll get started. Let's go. What's that? Fatherhood inspiration right here. Okay, welcome back, guys, to part 2 of my BTS breakdown series of my short film Fatherhood. Today, we're going over modeling and the steps that I took in order to pull this off. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I got a special guest star I'd like to introduce you to. He kind of wants to come on and say hi. I promised him he could. So stick around for that. And yeah, let's get started. Let's roll that intro. No, let's roll it. I said let's fucking roll it. Okay, guys, here we are inside of Blender. Yeah, where to start? So there's basically 5 key steps that I want to go over. Basically, this is going to be an overview / tutorial highlighting a lot of key things to approach when making something like this, while also showing, like a visualization of my process. So basically, these 5 steps are pretty much how I was able to pull this off. And I really can't stress enough how these 5 key steps really is what allowed me to be able to pull off such a crazy animation in such a short amount of time. So yeah, let's just get started. So first thing I want to go over is number 1, simple and clean and low poly mesh. Now, what do I mean by that? So for example, here we have Ernie, and let me just actually turn off the lights, all of his extra parts. Let's just turn these off for a second too. Okay, so here we have Ernie, right? And if you're to kind of zoom in here and look at a piece of his body here, his mesh, you can actually see how very basic, the geometry is on him. Like, this leg has only 100 faces and only 141 vertices. So very low poly. And then on top of this, we have a bevel modifier to give some extra detail. But yes, it's very low poly leg here. Let's take a look at some of his other parts. Same here. This is only 170 vertices. You kind of get the point here. So step 1 is making your model as low poly as possible. And when I first started out, I thought low poly was like lazy, and I thought it meant like I thought it was like underachieving, right? I thought everything, no, why would I make it low poly when I don't care how long it takes? I'll make it high poly, I'll make it high detailed. I thought the more polygons it had, the more geometry it had, I thought the more detailed it was. And in fact, it's actually not really always the case. Now, I was able to get away with certain parts being low poly, like these legs and these arms, because they move like a robot. They don't bend like a human. If this were a human arm and it had to bend fluidly, you would need a lot more geometry because you would need those creases and all that extra detail. But robots have joints, so all the bending is done right here, and you can get away with just putting a little joint there. So yeah, when I first started out, I actually did this robot video for Alesso, an entire animated music video, and I had like 10 robots in it, and I actually baked all of the subsurf modifiers into the mesh. I also like joined in some bolts and wires and all this stuff, and one robot itself was extremely just way over the top, like high poly, like hundreds of thousands, if not like a million vertices. So animating that was fucking crazy. Very time consuming and very annoying, but you know, I didn't know any better back then. So this time around, I made sure I did not do that. Certain parts that did need to be a little higher poly were like this little wire here, and even here, this is only 256 vertices, but then there's a subsurf modifier on here. So if you turn that off, you can actually see how low poly it is, and then you turn it on. So yes, the only two parts that are a little bit higher, because all these are very basic geometry. Like, I mean, they are literally just the primitive shapes. Like this is a cylinder. This is a sphere. These are all very. This is a extruded circle, I believe, or extruded cylinder. These are all cubes, just modified cubes. Very basic geometry. The two most complicated parts are the chest. You can see here it's a little bit higher, and it's sitting at around 2,800 vertices. Still not crazy. And this is just because it's a pretty large object, and it has a very odd shape with a lot of different creases, and it just required that much detail and geometry. And then of course the other one is the head, which is sitting around 2,300 vertices. Still nothing crazy. My computer did not lag once while animating this, so yeah, so this all worked out. Okay, number 2. This is more of a quick tip, not much of a tutorial or breakdown to show here, but number 2 is to have decisive aesthetic direction. So when you're modeling, just be very decisive in what you're trying to say about the character. And that should be kind of determined mentally before you ever, or definitely determined mentally before you ever even jump into this process. So when I was making this, for example, I knew I needed the audience to relate with this guy, to relate with the father character. So he had to be non-threatening. He couldn't be like this badass, you know, almost scary type robot. He couldn't be super futuristic. He couldn't be like a Terminator. He had to be something that's almost like borderline cute, but at the same time an adult. So as you can see here, I kind of halfway modeled him after me, like just kind of like tall and lanky. You know, my creative decision was, okay, I need him to be non-threatening, so skinny. He doesn't have any weapons on him. He doesn't have anything that could be scary or anything that's hiding in the crevices. Nothing like that. It's all very obvious, very out in the open. He's almost very vulnerable. He almost looks like you could just kick him down the stairs and he'd fly around. But that was my creative and aesthetic direction. I wanted him to look like a nerdy dad, basically, without the fanny pack. Okay, so jumping into the actual modeling part of this, I want to show you, it's kind of tip number 3, 4, and 5, but we'll start with, this is tip number 3. So let's create a new rig here. So the reason why we want to bring in a rig is because I actually did it backwards, and I modeled the robot based around a rig because I only had 6 days to do this. I didn't have time to deal with any wonky rigs or something not working. So I knew if my robot was very similar to this rig, I knew for the most part it would work. Tip number 4 is to model in parts. So you don't need to model everything. Not everything has to be part of the same object. You know, you don't have to come in here and extrude this leg and then extrude that leg and then try to, come over here and do a loop cut and then, select these pieces and extrude it, and then, you know, select these fucking shit, and then select those pieces and extrude up. So when I first started out, I would have had no idea. I would have probably tried to do something like this and think that's cool, like, oh yeah, look, I got this little robot going. But actually, if you see my character here, he's completely made up of dozens of different parts. You know, each individual limb is actually a different part. And obviously, with the robot, you can get away with that. Can't get away with that with a human. But I'm covering how I made a robot. So, yeah. So, number 5 is actually what's going to kind of lead us into a little bit of my visual kind of breakdown. But number 5 is modeling with symmetry on. So, to show you exactly what I was just doing, if you just kind of create a cube and you're like, oh, let's make this left leg here. Well, again, when I first started out, this is exactly what I did. I was like, okay, let me just start off by making one leg. And I would go and make my leg. And then I would do this. And when I first started out, I would literally start from scratch. I would do it all over again. And the problem with that is things aren't symmetrical. So the rig itself is always, you know, for the most part symmetrical. So then when you're rigging and trying to animate, if you have one leg that looks like this and one that looks like that, there's going to be a lot of problems. And then the other thing I used to do was like, okay, let me just take that and duplicate that and just try to line that up. And that's okay. That works. But there's also just a simpler way. So I'm going to open up a new project file and just kind of show you how to model like just like a thigh or something like that. Okay, so first thing I did was I brought in a human rig and started with a cube. Okay, you start off with a cube. It starts off right at 0, 0, 0, the origin point of the world. You actually want to leave it there while you turn on, you add the mirror modifier to it. Now, if you hop into edit mode, or actually, sorry, still in object mode, if you move this around, the mirror modifier did nothing, and this could be a little confusing. So you have to hop into edit mode, select all your points, and then move it on the x-axis, and now you have an exact duplicate. And later, once everything is done and everything's good to go, you can actually apply the mirror modifier, and then you'll have two separate legs. But for now, let's keep them together. And what we're going to do is kind of just move this up and move this to the base of the thigh bone. So the way I approached this was I did not want to mess with this area right here because I knew that's where the obviously the limbs, they bend, and there would be a lot of issues because robots aren't supposed to have any of that bending, and I knew there'd be a lot of issues there, so I didn't even want to deal with that. So I just put joints here at the knees and then left all of these 3 separate pieces. So we need the thigh to be thicker at the top, obviously. Let's make that a little thicker at the top. Come into side view, and again, here I am just kind of lining it up with the rig. So go ahead and apply the scale, and I also added a bevel modifier on top of this. Turn down the width and turn up the segments. And wow, okay, that's actually kind of embarrassing how easy and simple my legs were. Okay, so add in a sphere, shrink it down, add on the mirror modifier, and start moving things around. I mean, yeah, it's actually, like I said, simple. It really is now that I'm looking at it, but I mean, this is exactly what I did. Okay, so obviously my legs are a little bit more detailed, so let's go ahead and add in a little bit more detail. But to be honest, like yeah, it's not insane. The process isn't that crazy. what I did, and make sure I shade smooth. And then another thing is to make sure that this bevel modifier has a limit and an angle on it and something like that. So another, I guess, quick tip or something that I used when designing Ernie for Fatherhood was I did use this add-on called Cuber by Blender Guppy, and here's his Gumroad. I think I bought the creative bundle, so for $20 you get all these. It's actually pretty sick, but basically Cuber allowed me to quickly add all these individual like boolean operations, all these cuts into the actual leg that give it that extra amount of detail. You can do it without the plugin. It's just a little bit more annoying. The plugin or the add-on cleans up all the topology and does everything under the hood, which is pretty sick. And to show you, you just go into edit mode, and you press Alt X or whatever hotkey that you want to use it as. And let's see, what do we do here? Okay, let's add a cube, and basically, yeah, you just kind of go in here. To be honest, I kind of forgot how to use it, but Alt X and difference. Ah, there we go. Okay. And look how easy and sick that looks, and doesn't even mess with your modifier stack. So I do definitely highly recommend that. You can do custom shapes like I did here, and then I actually kept those shapes and plugged them back in to give a little bit more detail. But if you don't want to buy that add-on and you want to do it yourself, I will just show you how to quickly do that. Let's say you want to put something right here and cut into this a little bit like I did. Come over here and add a boolean. Click this little guy here, and let's hide the skeleton. And let's see. So this is obviously why the add-on's pretty cool, because you don't have to deal with this stuff. So if you make that wireframe, you can kind of move this around to your liking, see exactly where you want to put it, scale it around, and then let's see, let's actually do shade flat, yes, because these were both shade flat. So let me hide the skeleton. And so, I mean, that works too. And that looks pretty cool. And then you can just come over here and hit apply. And then if you wanted to have that shape like I did, you just turn this guy back on. Maybe scale it down, apply the scale, and then add a bevel modifier. You know, something like this. But and probably make that smaller and just line it up. But and then you could always kind of let's see, maybe come back in here. But yeah, you get the point. I mean, that's the Boolean hard surface modeling part. But yeah, just a little quick tip. Just wanted to show you exactly what I did. I did use the what the fuck is this thing called? The Cuber add-on. But again, you don't have to. So for this last part, I just kind of want to show you a little bit more, some specific parts, a little bit more in detail. You can notice here in my my robotic face is not very robotic. It's actually the texture that tells you it's a robot's face. You know, compared to my reference images, mine looks almost human-like, and that's exactly what I was going for. I wasn't going for this super robotic look. I wanted my character to look friendly, almost have the outline of a human head with a somewhat, you know, jawline silhouette, and a very familiar looking face. So when modeling the face, I wanted it to almost look like I had a jawline and not to be so distant and hard to connect with. In fact, it only has a few sharp edges on the face, and the rest is actually round, inviting, and non-threatening. This helps to me make it cute. The other thing that's very important are the eyes, which are arguably the most detailed. This model has a mix of square and organic shapes, to me making this a humanoid hybrid robot, which is exactly what I wanted. honestly, I would say the legs are probably the most robotic part about him, obviously, as well as the torso. So when it comes to the eyes are actually made up of 7 different layers, and each one of these objects is just a cylinder modified with different shape keys, different textures. And as far as the intricacies of this model, the eyes are definitely one of the more complex parts of Ernie, and one of the most detailed. We have a blinking shape key where he blinks in a circular motion versus a vertical flapping of the eyelids, and you have the emitter object that is powering the lighting behind all those other layers. That shines through the glass layer, shines through the wireframe layer. There's also an iris object that's a part of the eye rig, and there's a shape key on that I keyframe to just react to light. It's very subtle, but in the short film, when Ernie walks through the light, his eyes get his pupils get smaller, and then when he goes into the dark, they get bigger. It's just a very subtle thing, but I thought it was cool, a cool little touch to give him a little bit more life. And then, of course, the ears. The ears, to me, are one of my favorite parts about Ernie. They give him a lot of characteristics. They make him, all of his emotions are in his ears. Another subtle thing about the ears is the lights on the top are synced with the lights in his mouth. So when Ernie talks, his mouth blinks in sync with his ears. Which I did this because I didn't think the mouth was enough, and it also just didn't look as cool. It looked better to see this whole robot kind of reacting every time he talked. It just gave him a little bit more life. And another thing I want to just point out is the torso here. While it might look a little complicated, it's just a few cylinders extruded up here and here and here. And these are all very primitive shapes. This is another cylinder, and this was just a cube. And every single object here was created with the mirror modifier on and then applying it later. And the reason behind making this a cylinder with a subsurface modifier on there was because when I when I turn the rig on and I start to move Ernie around, let's bend him back, or let's bend him in a weird way. Maybe take this one. Okay, yes. So, obviously robots aren't organic. They're not squishy. So I needed something here that could react the way I knew the rig was going to react. And to me, that was this big coil here. So if for any reason he had to, stretch or like shrink or bend back, this coil, this big wire here, does it very naturally. Watching that bend like that makes a lot of sense. Obviously these don't, but at least this would be accurate. Alright guys, that's it for part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something. And I'll see you in part 3, texturing. And oh yes, and as promised, I did say I would introduce a special guest star. Let me go grab him real quick.
Hello, friend. Check out new episodes of Ernie and Me